My name's Annette Chapman. I teach at Edinburgh College, which is in Edinburgh, the capital city of Scotland. Our project was based around songwriting, and I wanted to incorporate the Scots language, so we did a lot of reading in Scots, plays in Scots like Bessie Dunlop, The Witch of Dalry, which was kind of folklore based, and we shared stories of folklore, similar stories from different countries, and we created a framework of We're all Jock Tamson's bairns, which is a Scots phrase, and discussed what that meant to the students from all the different countries. So although most of our students are Scots and speak in Scots normally, they were quite reticent to use it in a formal situation. And that kind of led to quite a lot of discussion about the issues of the relevancy or legitimacy of minority languages, and some really interesting discussions around about that from some of our Swedish students as well. Getting them to read and interact with each other in whatever language that you're using early in the process with smaller groups, maybe one-to-one to start with, just to help build their confidence and just encouraging them to do that from an early stage, I think. This is a songwriting activity with my students, and following on from our initial work, I asked them to bring in an object that they felt represented what we decided We're All Jock Tamson's bairns means to them. So they brought these objects in, and it was about how they felt about the theme itself, and there was a wide range of objects that they brought in. Well, we asked the students to share why they chose the objects. And what I was really surprised by, actually by the whole group, the whole class, the stories were so varied and came at it from different angles. So it was really, really interesting. We had one student who's a Spanish student who was missing home and had a piece of jewellery that reminded them of being home. We had a Scottish student who brought a packet of chewing gum. And talked about how, if you can offer a piece of chewing gum to a stranger and then it sparks a conversation. And it was all about how we all have the same experiences no matter where we come from. So it was very interesting and a real surprise to me, the variety. It's a really good idea to ask them to tell personal stories, obviously not too personal, but something that they can relate to in a less formal way. To the class as a whole before you start to ask them to do structured storytelling. And it seemed to be a really good way of getting them to relax into being natural when they're telling stories. Well, I actually used well-established songwriting techniques and embedded the work that we'd done on storytelling and finding stories within that. So there's activities such as diving, which is where you use an object, in this case one that the students had already brought, to write about what we feel about the object, what it looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like, touch, using all their senses. And that was a really useful thing. And then we cluster, which is bringing ideas together that come from the words that they have found. So that was a really useful activity in order to help them sort of explore their own creativity. I was really delighted that they didn't just fall back on the object itself, but still seemed to retain some of the ideas of what the object meant to them through the work that they did with the songwriting. That was really interesting, and that as they developed their stories, that they were able to develop plots and storylines that managed to embed all the ideas that they'd found in their dives and their clustering activities. So there was a direct line, but just really interesting result. There's one group, ended up being two students. One was Italian and one English, who took their objects, worked together as a team, created and developed a really good lyric and piece of music to go with it that incorporated singing predominantly in English with some spoken word in Italian. So it really pulled everything together. I would say that it's key to not just accept that students fall back on their own languages and what they're comfortable with when they're doing their stories, that you encourage them to work together in groups to explore each other's languages and be a wee bit more adventurous. And if you embed that from the start of the process, by the time you get to this part, they will be more accepting of that and a wee bit more adventurous. There were two songs that stood out in particular for me. One was a Scottish student who saw that process through from the beginning right through to the end, and in the lyric, in the final song, the lyric and the music, it gelled very well, and it was clear to see the story coming through in the final song, and it was a very effective performance. The second song involved three of the students, and the songwriters were an Italian and an English songwriter, and they worked together and incorporated the Italian language and the English language. There was some Scots in there actually too, and they performed their songs live in the concert, but they also took it into the recording studio, but they really embraced the whole recording process, and so that they designed it in such a way as that it was really fit for purpose in both environments. I think not to be afraid if you don't have very advanced students, and even if your students are not music students, you can still use songwriting as part of the Story Valley process. What you can do is, if you yourself are musical, you can give your students a song structure, a simple song progression, and ask them to create the lyrics for that song. Or you can match students up with more advanced students, or even other students from outside your organisation, and it might be quite a nice way of making connections in the community, so that you can concentrate on the storytelling aspect of it and the lyric writing aspect of it. And through doing that, you're also introducing the students into something a little bit exciting that they may not normally be doing as part of their course.